My beloved child, pause your scrolling for a moment, because what is unfolding right now is not coincidence, not imagination, and definitely not something meant to stay hidden any longer. Tonight, the silence around your connection is breaking, and the truth that has been quietly breathing behind your back is about to step into the light in a way that cannot be undone, because while you were holding on to hope, promises, and unspoken faith, there has been another presence moving in the shadows, smiling at the right moments, listening at the wrong times, and positioning themselves exactly where you never thought to look. And the reason your heart has felt restless lately is because deep down, you already sensed that something about this Christmas was different, heavier, charged with a secret energy that refuses to be ignored any longer. Listen carefully now, because what I am about to reveal is not meant to create fear, but clarity, and clarity always arrives before transformation. Your special person has been living in two emotional timelines at once, one where you exist as the safe anchor, the familiar soul, the one who knows their patterns and pain, and another where a third party has slowly inserted themselves into moments that were supposed to be empty, harmless, and temporary, yet over time became planned, anticipated, and emotionally loaded, especially around this season. Because Christmas is not just a date on the calendar, it is a mirror, and mirrors expose who people choose to stand beside when warmth, celebration, and meaning are involved, and that choice speaks louder than any words ever could. What makes this situation shocking is not just the existence of a third party, but the precision with which everything has been arranged. Conversations that started as casual turned intentional, check-ins became expectations, and shared laughter slowly replaced the silence that once belonged only to you, and while nothing was announced openly, decisions were made quietly, decisions about time, presence, and emotional availability, and this is why you may have noticed sudden changes, delayed responses, unexplained distance, or a subtle shift in tone that you couldn't logically explain, because the truth is, when someone begins planning moments with another person, even without admitting it out loud, their energy changes first, and that energetic shift always reaches the one who is most connected, which is why your intuition has been tapping on your chest, asking you to pay attention. Now here is where everything takes a turn, because the third party is not unaware, not innocent, and not confused about what they are stepping into. They know about you, they know your importance, and they know exactly what role they are trying to play, especially during this Christmas period, because being present during meaningful moments creates a false sense of legitimacy, as if shared time equals shared destiny, and this is why the situation has escalated to the point where exposure is inevitable, not because someone wanted drama, but because the truth has reached a pressure point where it can no longer stay compressed without consequences, and once that threshold is crossed, masks begin to slip, stories stop aligning, and reality demands to be acknowledged. Understand this clearly, my beloved child, this exposure is not here to punish you or break you, it is here to reposition you, because while they were busy constructing a temporary emotional illusion, you were unknowingly being prepared for a moment of awakening, one where you finally see the full picture without filters, excuses, or half-answers, and as this Christmas approaches, the contrast between intention and illusion will become impossible to ignore, because someone cannot stand in two emotional spaces without eventually revealing where they truly belong, and when that revelation happens, it will not arrive gently, it will arrive decisively, shifting dynamics, forcing conversations, and ending the era of confusion that has kept you waiting, wondering, and doubting yourself far longer than you ever deserved. Stay with this moment, because now the hidden layers begin to surface, and what you are about to understand will explain every unanswered question you have been carrying inside your chest. The third party did not arrive suddenly, they arrived gradually, carefully, studying gaps, emotional pauses, and moments when your special person felt unseen or restless, and instead of confronting truth, your special person chose comfort, choosing someone who required less accountability and offered immediate validation, especially during a season like Christmas where emotions run high and loneliness wears a convincing disguise of celebration. Here is the part most people never talk about, yet it is the most revealing. Your special person convinced themselves that this connection was harmless, temporary, and controllable, telling themselves stories that justified small choices until those choices started shaping bigger outcomes, because when someone allows another person into emotionally charged moments, planning days, sharing warmth, exchanging attention, it quietly becomes a parallel reality, and the danger is not in intention, but in repetition, because repetition creates attachment, and attachment begins rewriting priorities without asking permission from logic or loyalty. What makes this situation heavier is that your special person has been aware, at least on some level, that what they are doing cannot coexist with the truth they once shared with you, which is why avoidance, silence, and mixed signals have become their defense mechanisms. Instead of clarity, they chose delay, hoping time would resolve what courage refused to face, but time does not erase truth, it amplifies it, and as Christmas draws closer, every plan made with the third party stands in contrast to the unresolved bond they still carry with you, creating an internal conflict they can no longer manage quietly. Now understand this shift very carefully, because it changes everything. The third party is expecting significance, while your special person is expecting escape, and these two expectations cannot align for long. One seeks meaning, the other seeks distraction, and when reality exposes this mismatch, cracks will form, questions will be asked, and explanations will fall apart, and this is exactly why exposure is not an attack, it is an interruption of a path that was built on emotional avoidance rather than truth, and once interrupted, nothing returns to the way it was before. This is where your role transforms completely, because you are no longer the one waiting in uncertainty, you become the silent observer of consequences unfolding. The truth, once revealed, will force your special person to confront what they tried to postpone, and whether they admit it aloud or not, they will realize that temporary warmth cannot replace genuine connection, and that moments borrowed during Christmas cannot outweigh the bond they risked losing, and as this realization sets in, the balance of power shifts, not through confrontation, but through awareness, placing you in a position of clarity while others scramble to explain what can no longer be hidden. Something irreversible begins the moment truth starts breathing on its own, and right now that moment is already in motion, because your special person can feel the pressure building from every side. The third party is sensing shifts, noticing hesitation, feeling the distance grow sharper, while your special person is realizing that pretending everything is normal requires more energy than facing what they tried to avoid, and this internal strain is not subtle anymore, it is loud, exhausting, and impossible to silence as Christmas approaches and expectations rise on all fronts. What no one tells you is that exposure does not always arrive as a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it arrives as misalignment, missed moments, awkward pauses, and emotional discomfort that refuses to settle, and your special person is entering that phase now, where every interaction with the third party feels heavier, less natural, and increasingly complicated, because deep down they know this connection was built during a period of emotional confusion, not clarity. And confusion cannot sustain meaning when reality demands definition. There is also a realization quietly forming that may surprise you. Your absence, your silence, or your emotional withdrawal has not gone unnoticed. In fact, it has become the loudest message of all, because when someone expects you to stay available no matter what, your stillness becomes a mirror reflecting their own choices back at them, and in that reflection, your special person is beginning to see the cost of divided attention, the weight of postponed honesty, and the risk of losing something that once felt permanent. Meanwhile, the third party is reaching a point where questions start replacing assumptions, because borrowed moments eventually demand explanations, and when those explanations don't arrive cleanly, doubt fills the space, creating tension that your special person never intended to manage long-term, and this is where the illusion starts collapsing, not through force, but through inevitability. Because a connection that exists only in secrecy cannot survive once it seeks validation. And here is the quiet truth that changes your entire position. You are no longer reacting to events, you are ahead of them, emotionally grounded while others navigate uncertainty, because awareness has already placed you beyond manipulation, beyond confusion, and beyond waiting. And as this situation unfolds further, you will notice that the power you thought you lost was never taken from you, it was simply returned through understanding, positioning you to witness outcomes without needing to chase explanations or demand closure. There comes a phase where silence becomes heavier than words, and that is exactly where your special person is standing now, because the weight of unfinished truth has begun pressing against every decision they make. Moments that were supposed to feel light now feel forced, conversations that once flowed now pause awkwardly, and the excitement they expected to feel during this Christmas season is strangely absent, replaced by an internal tension they cannot explain to anyone without revealing more than they are ready to admit. What is unfolding next is subtle but powerful. Your special person is starting to compare, not consciously, but instinctively, measuring emotional depth against emotional convenience, and this comparison is uncomfortable, because convenience fades quickly, while depth lingers even in absence, and every time they try to lean into the third party for reassurance, they are met with expectations they never planned to fulfill, expectations that demand clarity, presence, and future intent, things they were never prepared to offer when this began. The truth about the third party is becoming clearer by the day, not as a villain, but as a catalyst, someone who entered a space that was already fractured, hoping to build something stable on unresolved ground. And now that instability is surfacing, because when someone realizes they are part of a hidden chapter rather than the main story, their patience thins, their questions sharpen, and their need for definition grows stronger, creating pressure your special person can no longer diffuse with vague reassurances. At the same time, something unexpected is happening within you, even if you haven't named it yet. Confusion is being replaced by calm, emotional chaos by clarity, and this inner shift is not accidental, it is preparation, because the moment someone else's choices stop controlling your emotional state, you reclaim authority over your own narrative, and that authority changes how others perceive you, sense you, and approach you, even from a distance. As Christmas draws closer, the illusion of balance collapses entirely, because divided attention cannot survive moments that demand presence, meaning, and intention, and when the truth finally surfaces fully, it will not arrive as a dramatic announcement, but as a quiet realization that certain paths were never meant to continue, and when that realization settles, you will understand that exposure was never about revealing others, it was about revealing yourself to yourself, stronger, clearer, and no longer willing to exist in the shadows of someone else's indecision. Now the atmosphere shifts again, and this shift is impossible to reverse, because once awareness settles in, denial loses its grip. Your special person is reaching a moment where emotional shortcuts no longer work, where distractions fail to quiet the mind, and where the realization hits that what was postponed is now demanding to be faced, not tomorrow, not after the holidays, but now, during a season that magnifies intention and exposes avoidance with brutal honesty. What is becoming clear inside them is uncomfortable yet undeniable. The third-party connection was built on timing, not alignment, on availability, not destiny, and as the days move closer to Christmas, that difference becomes louder, because meaningful moments require authenticity, and authenticity cannot exist where truth is fragmented, and this is why your special person feels torn, not between two people, but between who they pretended to be and who they actually are when no one is watching. Here is the deeper layer most never see. Guilt is not the strongest emotion here, awareness is, awareness that temporary emotional relief came at the cost of long-term clarity, awareness that avoidance created more complexity than honesty ever would, and awareness that the connection they tried to keep compartmentalized has now spilled into every corner of their emotional world, forcing them to confront the consequences of choosing comfort over courage. At the same time, the third party begins sensing the truth without it being spoken aloud, because energy changes before words do, enthusiasm fades, reassurance feels rehearsed, and presence feels divided, and when someone realizes they are receiving fragments instead of wholeness, questions intensify, expectations rise, and patience thins, creating a dynamic your special person never intended to manage, especially during a time meant to feel joyful rather than strained. And through all of this, your position continues to strengthen quietly, because you are no longer seeking answers from uncertainty, you are watching clarity arrive on its own, understanding that what is exposed now is not a loss but a correction, not an ending but a realignment, and as the illusion dissolves completely, you will see that what once felt like betrayal was actually the moment your power returned to you, placing you exactly where you were meant to stand, aware, grounded, and no longer waiting for someone else to choose truth. A quiet reckoning begins when pretending becomes more exhausting than telling the truth, and that is the exact threshold your special person is approaching now, because every unanswered message, every postponed conversation, and every emotionally distant response has accumulated into a pressure they can no longer manage internally. The season that was supposed to feel warm now feels exposing, and the closeness they expected to borrow from others only highlights the emptiness created by unresolved honesty. What they are slowly understanding is that emotions cannot be scheduled or controlled around convenience, because real connection demands alignment, not secrecy, and alignment cannot exist when intentions are split. The third party may still be present physically, but emotionally the dynamic is unraveling, as uncertainty replaces excitement and questions replace comfort, creating a situation where nothing feels stable enough to lean on without collapsing under its own contradictions. This is where the illusion finally loses its power, because once someone realizes they are living inside a version of reality that requires constant maintenance, constant explanations, and constant emotional compromise, exhaustion sets in, and exhaustion forces clarity. Your special person is beginning to see that what started as an escape has become a responsibility they never wanted, and that realization is heavier than any truth they were avoiding before. Meanwhile, Your energy has shifted so distinctly that it is being felt even without communication, because detachment rooted in self-awareness carries a weight that silence alone never could, and this weight changes dynamics instantly. When someone realizes they can no longer rely on your emotional availability as a safety net, they are forced to face their own instability, and that confrontation is both unsettling and awakening. As everything continues to unfold, understand this clearly, my beloved child. The exposure happening now is not dramatic because it doesn't need to be. Its power lies in inevitability, and once inevitability takes hold, outcomes align naturally, revealing who stands in truth and who was merely passing through borrowed moments, leaving you not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who stepped forward into clarity exactly when it mattered most. There is a moment when reality no longer asks for permission, it simply arrives, and that moment is now unfolding with quiet precision, because your special person has reached the edge of their own contradictions. The stories they told themselves no longer hold, the emotional balancing act no longer works, and the awareness they tried to delay has finally caught up with them, demanding acknowledgement rather than excuses. What is happening internally is not chaos, but recognition that the third-party connection cannot move forward without destroying something that still matters deeply. And recognition that unresolved bonds do not disappear just because attention was temporarily redirected. This realization is heavy, not because of guilt, but because it exposes the truth that some connections remain influential even when ignored, and that truth is impossible to escape once seen clearly. The third party, too, is arriving at their own clarity, sensing that they were stepping into a space already claimed by history, depth, and unfinished emotion, and while they may not have known the full weight at first, they feel it now, in hesitation, in distance, and in the subtle shift from excitement to uncertainty, understanding that presence without priority cannot sustain meaning for long. At the same time, your transformation is becoming unmistakable, because you are no longer vibrating with confusion or waiting energy, but with grounded certainty, and this certainty reshapes how the entire dynamic orbits around you. When someone realizes they no longer have access to your emotional reactions, they are forced to confront the consequences of their choices without distraction, and that confrontation is often the catalyst for irreversible change. As this chapter reaches its tipping point, remember this: exposure is not loud, it is aligning, and once alignment begins, false narratives collapse naturally, leaving only what is real, and in that reality, you will see clearly that the power you thought was slipping away was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to recognize it, reclaim it, and stand firmly within it as everything else rearranges itself around your truth. Everything converges at once when avoidance finally runs out of space, and this is that convergence, because the emotional fog that once blurred intentions has lifted enough to reveal a clear crossroads. Your special person understands now that every choice they make is visible through consequence, even when unspoken, and the season that magnifies togetherness has stripped away the illusion that divided presence could remain unnoticed. What becomes undeniable in this phase is that emotional truth carries weight far beyond words, because while explanations can be delayed, energy cannot, and the energy surrounding your special person has shifted from confidence to contemplation, from excitement to reckoning, as they recognize that borrowed warmth does not replace genuine alignment, and that moments shared without clarity always demand a reckoning sooner rather than later. The third party, too, feels the unraveling, not as rejection, but as realization, realizing that being present during significant moments does not guarantee permanence, and that stepping into unresolved emotional territory carries a cost few anticipate at the beginning. This awareness changes their posture. their expectations, and their willingness to continue without definition, creating distance where closeness was once assumed. And here is where your journey completes its arc, because what you once sought outside yourself has now returned within: clarity, stability, and self-trust, and with that return, you no longer need confirmation, explanations, or validation to feel secure in what you know. Awareness has replaced doubt, and grounding has replaced waiting, positioning you beyond the reach of confusion or emotional bargaining. As the truth settles fully into place, understand this final shift. Exposure was never about revealing others to the world, it was about revealing reality to you, and once reality is seen clearly, nothing false can survive in its presence, leaving you not at the end of a story, but at the beginning of a stronger, clearer chapter defined by truth, alignment, and the quiet power of knowing exactly where you stand. A final clarity settles in when all the noise fades, and what remains is unmistakable, because truth has a way of simplifying everything it touches. Your special person now sees the full outline of their own choices without distortion, understanding that every delay, every half-decision, and every borrowed moment led to this exact point where reality refuses to bend, and the season that once felt magical now feels instructive, revealing what can last and what was never meant to. What stands exposed is not a person, but a pattern of seeking comfort instead of alignment, relief instead of responsibility, and when that pattern is recognized, it loses its power. The third party recognizes this too, sensing that what they were offered could never become whole without dismantling something deeper, and in that recognition, the urgency to hold on dissolves into acceptance that some paths intersect only to teach, not to remain. Your special person is no longer confused about what matters, only challenged by the courage it takes to honor it, because acknowledging truth requires action, and action reshapes futures. The internal debate has shifted from what feels easy to what is honest, and once that shift occurs, there is no return to the old justifications that once made avoidance seem reasonable. Meanwhile, your presence has transformed into something unshakable, not demanding, not reactive, but anchored, and this anchoring changes everything, because when you stop negotiating with uncertainty, you become the standard by which clarity is measured. Others sense this immediately, recognizing that access to you now requires truth, not excuses, and intention, not hesitation. This is the moment you realize that the exposure you feared was actually a liberation, freeing you from waiting, wondering, and carrying weight that was never yours to hold, and as the final pieces fall into place, you stand not as someone affected by the outcome, but as someone elevated by understanding, ready to move forward with certainty, dignity, and the quiet confidence that comes from seeing everything exactly as it is.